It is February 18th. This is the Audacious NIMBY podcast. Welcome. I'm Patrick Harders, your host. It's about 9 o'clock at night right now, and I wanted to get a podcast in because we have so much going on in Prince William County. If you remember, wasn't that many years ago, you'd ask, what does my local government do? What happens here? That's not Prince William County. This is a government that doesn't sleep. There is always something going on here. And I'm here to bring you the information. I'm fighting off a little bit of a cold right now. That's why I didn't do a podcast earlier as, just the weather change, everything going on. I think everybody's got something happening, but what a 2 weeks it's been. So if you're paying attention to the last podcast and you heard it, I talked about smash mouth politics. I talked about what Kenny Bodie did, what Victor Angry did in October and getting rid of the DC OAG and how they played smash mouth politics. And it's time for the supervisors in a bipartisan way to play smash mouth politics to get something passed. And I want to give a big shout out. Surprised me. Yesley Vega last week, supervisor of the week, in my opinion, gave a resolution on her policy and her stance on data centers. That's what we need to see, is we need to see these visions come forth, this proclamation of what we want to see happen. Instead of just being reactionary, we want to have our supervisors that echo the voice of the people they're representing. And Yesley did a great job. I haven't talked to Yesley for a while, but just really laying out her vision for data centers. And she's always been a big proponent is they have to stay in the overlay. I am a big proponent to say we have enough, and then we need to move forward onto the next phase, which isn't housing sprawl either. We'll talk about that. But, great job, Yesley. Appreciate that. That's what we've been looking for. I've spoken to a number of the supervisors and other people in local office. And, that's what we need to see is we need to see, what their vision is, what they want to see happen, and what can we actually accomplish. The big thing that happened in the last 2 weeks was the election. So as everyone knows, Margaret Franklin moved on. First time I've cheered for Margaret Franklin to win an election, and we were really excited. We had the coronation of Pam Montgomery. She had all the endorsements, everything set up. Margaret had really set the table for her just to walk in, take over the spot. She was her chief of staff, and this was going to just simply be, a coronation event. This was really not an election. But guess what? The people have a voice, and the people could speak up, and they did. So it was 250 or 500 votes. So it was a 30 vote difference. So very low voter turnout. And so I will tell you over and over again, local politics affects you so much more than the national. And the fact that you're getting just hundreds of people showing up to a big election like this, it's disappointing, but congratulations to Seth Chasm. He defeated Pam Montgomery. And there was all sorts of crazy talk about election fraud and recounting the ballots. And is Pam going to run as an independent or under some special rule? So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But Seth Chasm did win. And guess what? That coveted Woodbridge district that always votes for data centers 100% of the time. We now have a candidate on the Democrat Party that is not a lock for data centers. In fact, he has spoken out against the data center sprawls. So that's a huge change. We also have Jeannie LaCroix. I personally have known Jeannie for many years. I knew her, going back like 2017, 2018. And this is long before I ever really entered politics. It was when I just started fighting some local corruption, and she was not in politics at all. And I had a company trip, and she actually came on our company trip with one of my employees. And that's when I first met her. A wonderful person. And surprisingly, we both got active in our local communities about the same time. She ran against Margaret Franklin last time and had some good results. That's a very tough election. So I would definitely say there's a lot more to happen in this Woodbridge race. But you have two candidates that have both spoken out against data center sprawl. This is a game changer. This changes the board. We were trying to get something through, or at least I was advocating, let's get something through while we have a chance, while we have the majority of the vote. Let's do the same thing that Victor and Kenny did to us with the shutting down of the TCOAG. Let's do something with them. And so that's what I know that was kind of going on behind the scenes and that they're trying to make work. But this changes everything. Now we have we have the majority of supervisors are now going to be anti-data center. It switches from back in 2019, 2020, 2021, 22, 23, 24, it was always a 5-3 vote. Now we're looking at a consistent 5-3 vote the other way. So a huge political shift. There's been rumblings heard around the country that the people of Prince William County have spoken. And the data center industry is listening. The country is listening. This is the biggest issue going on right now, and Prince William County is the epicenter. And the people have gotten involved in their local government. They've activated. They've been NIMBYs out there protecting their own backyard, which we need to be. And we are seeing a revolution happen. So that's an exciting thing. But we'll be keeping an eye on that race as things are going on. The other thing that happened was a supervisor meeting. And so this is where I was hoping somebody would step up and go, let's just knock something out. And I know there was discussion on, maybe the county should stop spending $2 million of your hard-earned tax money that we put in on the Prince William Digital Gateway on a poor decision made by the previous board that Ann Wheeler pushed through, that the data center industry said, we know the risks, move forward anyway, yet it's the citizens of Prince William County that are paying the cost. And so there was an idea, maybe that could be moved out. Maybe then we won't continue to fund this lawsuit and see what happens. We do have we do have the second part of the hearing, the appeal going on in a couple days now. But that's a big question, is should Prince William County be funding it? I have heard, and these are rumors, and take it for what it's worth, that they were told by county staff and legal advice that it would be the end of Prince William County as we know it. Criminals would run free, police would be arrested. It would be the demise of our county if we pulled out of this, which is complete hogwash. That's not true at all. They're just defending their poor decisions they made earlier. So I really hope that as this comes up again, obviously the last vote happened in October at the same time the DCOAG was shut down. It was a 4-3 vote, and the Gainesville district did not have a seat. And so they pushed through to continue funding this. We also had a little snafu happen recently, and we all know about that. But it is something that this should come up for a vote, and this is something that the people need to speak up to say, like, how much more money are we going to throw at this lawsuit? Are we bringing it up to the state Supreme Court? Are we now going to spend $4, $5, $6 million on this case? That's something to really something I'm against. I don't like us wasting taxpayer money. I think we should use it efficiently. There are so many better things it could go to than chasing poor decisions. Just simply bring it back to the board. It's a different board now, and that's why they're fighting it. Is I think they know what would happen if they brought it back to this board that's shaping up. But that is a warning siren. It's a warning siren to the digital gateway. There's also Cosmos that's just starting to rear its ugly head. There's other data centers projects out there. There's another one that they want to put in the Coles district. The data center industry isn't done. They want Merrifield. If allowed, they will continue to go throughout the entire county, and we will be a data center county with a couple houses mixed in. So it's important for you to speak up, to stay engaged, to stay involved, and it's important for our leaders, our elected representatives, to embrace the attitude of the citizens. So, we're calling on everybody to do that. We're calling on our leaders, and we have had a huge shift from where we were 3-4 years ago to where we're at now. And I credit that to so many people who have been engaged. You just can go down the list. Elena Schlossberg to Vita Carroll to Mac Haddow. There's literally hundreds of people. Bill Wright. There are so many people that have been involved and been active in this fight. And so often it felt like there's 10, 20, 30 of us that were raising the alarms and saying, this is really bad. Somebody needs to pay attention. And we are now seeing the sea shift change. And it's pretty exciting. I have to admit, it's fun. Other things going on in Prince William County. I don't know if you guys are paying attention at all, but boy, there's been some big news in Prince William County. Imagine Politico, which is a huge publication, writing an in-depth article on Prince William County. And they did. And I'm reading it, and it's the last 5 years, everything that's been going on, and it just kept going on and on and on, and I mean, it went through everything from Pete Canlin, you know, putting his house or buying a house in, and then, talking about being part of the data center community, not wanting it all over, but expanding the vote or expanding the study, to, politicians now working with LSI, I think it is, with Corey Stewart and Pete Canlin and Erica Tredednick. It talked about the DCOAG and how bad that looked. In fact, one of my favorite quotes, and I'd say last week, Yesli Vega was the supervisor of the week. This week, without a question, it was Deshunda Jefferson. She's got a huge picture in the political in the right way. And they asked her about that vote on the DCOAG that I referenced in our last podcast. And she said, I felt it was cowardly. And they talked about Victor Angry. He said, I do feel like Victor Angry wanted to get rid of that group, but you didn't want them to defend themselves or say anything. And Victor Angry, with the quote of the week, said, I don't talk to them. They don't have input in this. This is our decision. That was the vote. That was how the board was the entire time after 2020. They don't have input in this. I don't have to listen to them. This is my decision. That was Ann Wheeler. That was Victor Angry. And it went on to talk about the money coming in. So it talked about Victor Angry and Kenny Bodie taking in $313,000 since 2023 from data centers and landowners. Think about that number in local politics. It wasn't that long ago that like $50,000 was enough for somebody to run a race. Now I think it's easily 100 if you're going for chair. This one's going to be a big one. This chair is probably going to be like 500,000 by the time they get done, because the data centers are on one last, fight to stop all of us from actually keeping our properties and not having data centers everywhere. So this is going to be a real expensive one. But, typical supervisor race, you're going over $100,000. So for two supervisors in their, not even when they're running, to raise $313,000 just from the data centers and landowners, that just makes life very easy. All they have to do is rake in the money, and, I guess they could say that they're not tied to the vote, but, I think you have to go back and look at the voting records. And I say that with everyone. So, just because somebody takes money doesn't necessarily mean that they're evil and they're bad. They may be taking money and they're going to go against them, and that was the worst investment for that industry. But, chances are when you follow the money, a lot of times you're going to look at their voting record, and that's what you go by. You look at the results and what they actually did. In these two, it's hard to argue this. And I think, the supervisor that looked, it's a toss-up. Who looked worse this week, Kenny Bodie or Victor Angry? Both of them trying to defend what they did, showing very little remorse, saying they're not bought and paid for, while the Politico goes on to talk about how much money that they raised from the data centers and from landowners. Yeah, it's pretty damaging. So, I'm going to go ahead and link this. It's already on my Facebook page on Audacious NIMBY. It'll be on our website. So we'll have this article on here. So that's an insane thing. This is literally like what we talked about years ago, where like, how can we get somebody to pay attention? Like, this should be a movie. What we're going through should be something that we're talking about, that everybody's talking about. Like, this is more interesting than, most of the local news you're turning on. This is crazy things going on. This feels like Yellowstone more than just local politics. But, we finally had an article written, and it wasn't just a fluff piece. It was an in-depth article. So if that was enough for 1 week for Prince William County, which for most counties in America, to have Politico do really a hatchet job on the politicians and their involvement with the data centers, that would typically be enough. But that's not all that's happened. Wall Street Journal also wrote an article. Land grab for data centers is one more obstacle to much needed housing. So there's Wall Street Journal talking about Prince William County politics. So we are in the national spotlight. What we're talking about after 5 years of discussing this, of really, excuse me, fighting that cold still, of us shouting into the wind and nobody hearing us, nationally we are being heard. So great job to each of you that have been out there, that have been the warriors, that have been out there fighting, that have been in the trenches. Very proud of each of you and what you've been able to accomplish. Um, so I don't think this is I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think as these publications are looking at this, this story is going to continue to get out. And there is a question that we really have to wrestle with as a county is who do we want to be? Where do we want to go? And what does it mean to need housing? Like, obviously, we had a school last week that maybe 2 weeks ago that they decided not to move forward with. And I think the county had already invested around $20 million into the school project. But because of decreasing population, which is one thing I talked about, why a study should be done before we move forward with additional schooling and housing, is we should have a proper study done because a lot of the population estimates are based off of pre-COVID numbers, and Northern Virginia changed after COVID. So I think we do have to address that. But the second thing is, what do we want housing to look like? And, I'm a huge advocate for reinvestment, redevelopment, looking at our existing communities, reinvesting in Manassas, reinvesting in Woodbridge, and looking at open space instead of allowing the sprawl to happen. So this is going to be an educational program, and we're going to talk more and more about this. But this is all very exciting. There's a lot of great things happening. I'm very proud and of each of you for really being engaged in the fight, for not giving up, for not moving away, for not backing down. It looked pretty bleak not that long ago when it looks like the digital gateway's going in. It looks like the next data center is going in, whatever that one. So you have all these different things going on, the housing sprawl. We're having, assemblages go in, which you haven't even gotten into the assemblages by Pete Canlin, Corey Stewart, Erica Shredneck, with the rest of them. Like, we haven't even really got into that yet, and that's another subject. So it's looking like maybe we are going to get defeated, and you kept your chin up, you kept on fighting, and guess what? We're winning. We're on the winning side of this. So um, I want to talk about what's coming up for the Audacious NIMBY podcast. I'm going to have a guest on our next podcast. We're hoping next week, one of our local experts, and we're going to have a huge announcement. So a big event that's going to be coming up. I mean, this is going to rock Prince William County. So, our voice, we need to put an amplifier onto it. We need to have people understand how much we are committed to this fight and how much we love our area, how much we love Western Prince William County, how we want to have proper redevelopment into Eastern Prince William County and Western Prince William County, how we want to look at open space. And we want to make this county the shining example of proper land use in the state of Virginia, and to not be a data center menace, and to not have the electrical grid coming in. Like, damage has been done. Ann Wheeler did a ton of damage, but how do we mitigate that damage? And how do we keep this area as beautiful as possible? And that's what we're going to be talking about. So stay tuned. We're going to have a guest coming in very soon. Going to be a lot of fun, really a lot of information to go over. But, what a week. Election results, supervisor meetings, supervisors starting to come up, give their vision. Politico, we had, Wall Street Journal. You can't make this up. So I appreciate you for tuning in. Be ready for our announcement. And I'm so excited for our event coming up this March. Stay tuned for everything. Thank you so much.